Hi, I'm Oscar,
And I'm Charlotte.
and together we're the F1 couple. So on today's podcast, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the driver transfers that happened for the 2021 season, and evaluating how happy the drivers will be after this first race that's happened in Bahrain. So what we're doing is we're doing a little tier list, going from elated, being the most happy, down to devastated, where obviously the drivers will be incredibly disappointed with the outcomes. So we'll be looking at the drivers for this current season and also those who've left at the end of the 2020 season. So there's no better place to start than Mercedes, I think, and two drivers that have stayed in the same seats. So should we start with Hamilton?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So what do you think?
See, I know that you're going to say you think he's happy,
Mhm.
but after seeing the way that the Red Bull's performing, I'm wondering whether there's a tiny part of him that's going, should I have retired? Because
Yeah.
I think for this year, he's actually got a chance of being beaten.
Yeah, but I really don't think he's disappointed about that. I genuinely think he's excited
Yeah,
to actually be racing someone in a different car for the championship this year. I think this is going to bring out the best side of him,
yeah, I
rather
suppose.
rather than him feel like disappointed about that.
I know, but if he misses out on that 8th title, I wonder whether he's going to regret it.
No, I don't think so. He'd have missed out on it if he'd retired anyway.
Yeah, I suppose.
So yeah, I'm fully in the happy camp for Hamilton here. I think he's happy. He's got a great team that's very very supportive behind him. The only thing maybe not elated is, the contract talk dragged out, didn't it, a bit? And he'd probably be elated if he wasn't the fastest car, as you say, by miles and guaranteed to win his 8th title. I'm sure he'd be elated. But I think happy. I'm sure he's happy enough in there. He's probably earning enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bottas.
Yeah, I think he's pretty happy. I don't know what he's feeling about the end of the season and what might happen in terms of whether or not he'll keep that seat. But I think for now he's happy. I think he's permanently a little bit frustrated. I don't want to say upset, but I think frustrated that he has Hamilton as his teammate, and I think anyone would.
Yeah.
I think that kind of came through on Drive to Survive, but how much of that is true and how much of that is kind of what's the word?
Over-exaggerated. Yeah.
Because it's it's a Netflix show. But I think you can see the frustration. I think he definitely thinks that he is capable of more and that it's just Hamilton in his way. But at the end of the day, he's in the best car on the grid. He can't really complain.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably he's just pleased to be in that seat another year. Obviously, George Russell is there, knocking on the door really of eventually getting in that Mercedes seat. It's more of just when rather than if for Russell, I feel. So I'm sure Bottas is just happy to be in a race-winning car for another year. Yeah, so again, I think just happy on this one.
Yeah, I think the thing is that he's pretty much guaranteed to win at least one race this year.
Yeah.
You know, Verstappen and Hamilton will have a bad race and then he swoops in and, he takes it. So
yeah. He's won a race in most seasons. I think 2018 possibly it was, where he missed out through mostly bad luck. But yeah, in that Mercedes, I think he should be taking at least a race win at some point.
Yeah, I think he's quite happy.
Yeah, so if we move on to Red Bull and Verstappen.
Yeah, do you know what? I think he's elated. I think he actually really likes being with Red Bull. I don't think you can really tell. I don't think he really shows much emotion, but I think that he is really pleased with the car this year. I think he's really really happy that he stayed put. Not that I don't think there was particularly any question of him moving, but I think that he's got a competitive car and he's got the biggest chance he has ever had of winning the championship. So I think he's elated.
Yeah, I think elated as well for Verstappen here. I think it has to be. He's in the fastest car this year. He's arguably the fastest driver on the grid. I think there would be no one who wouldn't put him in their top 3 of the fastest drivers. So fastest driver, fastest car is always going to bring success. Okay, he didn't win the first race in Bahrain, but I'm sure he'd be back strong in Imola and beyond, and definitely pushing for that title. So I think it has to be elated.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be an interesting year.
Oh yeah, absolutely interesting year. His teammate Perez.
I think he's pretty happy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go as far as elated, because you've still got he's in the second Red Bull seat, so it's always going to be a little bit, because it's pretty clear that, Verstappen is the focus there. And I know there's that like second Red Bull seat curse kind of thing, which I think when we were looking at him in qualifying, it was like, oh no, please don't do that to Checo, But I think he kind of pulled it out of the bag a little bit on the Sunday in the actual race. And I think he's going to be really happy. He's switched from what is now Aston Martin, which aren't looking that great, and he's suddenly in the fastest car on the grid. I don't think he can really complain, other than being the second driver, really.
Yeah, I think I would go with the later tier. I'll try and convince you. So he's been happy. He was happy at Force India, which then turned into Racing Point and has now become Aston Martin. He was very happy there, and he had a contract in for up to 2022, I believe, with that team. But then when Ferrari got rid of Vettel and got Sainz in, and that whole saga, and Racing Point picked up Vettel, then it was Perez who was suddenly out and suddenly looking like he wasn't going to be in the sport at all. So from being very much on the cusp of not being in the sport at all to now being in the fastest car on the grid, I think anyone would be crazy to not be elated about that situation.
Yeah, he's very chilled though. He does come. I don't feel like he's really going to show. I will accept that he can be elated,
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think he's really going to show that. He's quite a mellow kind of guy, and I do think the one really good thing is that finally he got his win last season, and I really think that he could get another one.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be the favourite in any race, but I think he's definitely on the cards to get podiums. Like, chances are the top three are going to screw up at some point, and he's next in line in my head.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's going to be there, ready for podiums and ready for a win as well. We know he has the ability to win. So it's just a case of if he has a storming weekend, or so a couple of the other guys at Mercedes or Verstappen have an off weekend, then he'll definitely be there as well for that.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to a guy who's been forced out because of Perez coming in, Albon. I think there can be no question here that he must be devastated at the outcome of the driver saga, especially now seeing how good the Red Bull is this year. Obviously, he probably got a little bit of a rough hand last year. The Red Bull looked pretty unstable in general. Obviously, Verstappen has the quality to drag performances out of that car that no other driver would really be able to do. But yeah, Albon obviously squeezed out, replaced by Perez. I think that was the right decision by Red Bull, but it doesn't mean that Albon will be any less devastated about it.
Yeah, well, I think, I agree with you. I think he's devastated, but at the same time, I don't think he should have ever had that seat. Maybe that's controversial, I don't know, but I think Gasly was forced out too soon, and I'm not saying he was ready for that seat because I don't think he was, but I don't think Albon was the right replacement.
Yeah.
And I think he was very lucky. Is he the reserve now? He is the reserve, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the reserve. He's doing some DTM racing as well.
I feel like he's almost lucky to be in that position, because when you've got Verstappen as a teammate, you have to really, really be up there. And I think he just completely outshone him last year.
Yeah.
And, you don't want one teammate that's going to really, really push the car and overperform. You need both of them being there.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that the car maybe wasn't that stable, but, I think he also underperformed. There were lots of mistakes that he made. But while he's going to be devastated, I think, it's not unjust what happened.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. It's definitely not unjust. He definitely didn't do enough to show that he was worthy of that seat, and he certainly didn't do anywhere near as much as what Perez did to show that he deserves to be in the sport. I feel a little bit sorry for him because, yeah, you're right, he probably shouldn't have been in Red Bull that quickly. I mean, he came in halfway through his debut season in F1. He certainly wouldn't have been expecting that going into the season, so it's been very much fast in, fast out for Albon. So maybe you could make an argument for putting a little bit further up this list because the Red Bull atmosphere will have been very toxic for him last year. I'm sure lots of pressure on his head, but I still think he'll be devastated.
Yeah, I think he won't be, like you say, I don't think he's necessarily devastated that he's not a Red Bull anymore, although he is still at Red Bull. I think he's going to be devastated that he's no longer in the sport as a regular, as it were,
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, McLaren.
Norris. I think he has got to be elated.
Mm.
Honestly, I appreciate that it didn't look quite as good necessarily in the first race, but from what we were seeing in testing and in practice, that car is looking so good. And he was outperforming Ricciardo, who has got years of experience on him. And I think he's got to be so happy with where he's at.
Yeah, I'm sure he's happy. I don't know if I'd go as far to say elated. Maybe it's just because he's stuck with the same team. I'm saying that, and yeah, obviously McLaren have taken that bit of an extra step forward this year to maybe possibly break away from that midfield a little bit, go into their little bit of oh man's land, I guess. Yeah, Norris did a great race to fourth in Bahrain. Ricciardo maybe a little bit disappointing, but he had damage from the Gasly impact at the start as well, which maybe hindered him. But yeah, I think Norris will be happy. I don't know if I'd go as far to say elated.
Okay, fine. We'll go with happy.
We'll go with happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, for Ricciardo, what do you think?
I think he's happy.
Yeah.
I think he made the right decision leaving Renault. And I think he's going to be really happy about that. And, you know, like he has moved to the stronger team, in my opinion. But I don't think he's going to be elated just yet because I don't think he's fully settled into the team. But yeah, I think he's happy.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one as well. He'll certainly be happy to not be in that Alpine this year. I think the McLaren is looking by far the better car out of those two. So he's definitely made the right decision in that respect. But probably you're right, not elated yet. I think probably having that tough race to start with. I mean, still coming home 7th, I believe it was. But being fairly well beaten by Norris as well, that would have been a little taking the sweetener off, I suppose. So yeah, happy I think for Ricciardo. Okay, Aston Martin.
I think Stroll is very much a neutral. I mean, yes, he's there because of his dad. But you don't just get into that position in F1 without being a good driver as well.
Yeah.
The car's looking okay. I don't think it's fully settled yet. And I don't think we've necessarily seen the full potential of the car. But I think it's going to be a fairly, midfield-ish kind of level. It's certainly, it's worse than the Racing Point probably of last year, but historically it's probably a pretty decent for that team, I would say.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. He's a bit on neutral there. There was never going to be any doubt that he would have been going to a different team. He was always going to be staying in that Aston Martin seat. And seeing how they are this year, you could make an argument for him being a bit disappointed, having been up there, getting a pole position, getting some podiums last year, to now looking like he's on the fringe of points, how the car is at the moment. So, yeah, probably an element of disappointment in there, but fairly neutral, I think.
Yeah.
For Vettel, however, I think he will be disappointed with the outcome of the transfers. He probably, with how it was looking last year, he wouldn't have been that disappointed to leave Ferrari and go to a team that had won a race that season. But now Ferrari look like they're probably ahead of Aston Martin as well, and the way he was sort of forced out of Ferrari, wasn't great. And after a cataclysmic first race, really, where pretty much everything went wrong, he'll definitely be disappointed at the moment, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that is just bad luck. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of the things that happened weren't because of the car and they weren't because of the team. They were just they just happened, Yeah. But I think, like you say, I think the way that he was forced out of Ferrari, I think that is going to bring the biggest disappointment. But I don't think you could say, I think he's almost verging on neutral, because at the same time, we didn't know whether he was going to have a seat or not for a while last year. So I think he's probably fairly pleased that he's still driving.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that in there. So what are you saying? Are you saying neutral or disappointed?
Can I have neutral and a half?
No, I think if you're going to go neutral and a half and I'm saying disappointed,
okay,
then
we'll
go with disappointed.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree that I think in an ideal world he wouldn't have left Ferrari, and the car is looking so much better. From that point of view, it's got to sting a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, we'll go with disappointed.
Yeah, I think as a world champion, he's never going to be pleased in either of those cars. If it's not a car that's fighting for the championship, he's not going to be happy. But yeah, I think especially disappointed at the moment.
Yeah. Alpine.
Yeah.
What about Ocon?
Yeah, well, I think he'll be a bit disappointed, to be honest. Probably for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the car's not looking as good as it was last year. Obviously, you remember at the end of last year in Saga, he took his first podium. So he'd been hoping for maybe not exactly more of the same because that was a bit of a crazy race, but building upon that and taking some good high point scoring finishes this year. But it looks more like a car that's going to be fighting for lower top 10 at best at the moment. Obviously, things can change in the coming races. So I think he'll be a little bit disappointed about that, but also especially about Alonso coming back in to be his teammate, someone that's so quick and has that winning mentality about him, really. That's taken him to 2 world championships and should have taken him to more if Ferrari had given him a better car while he was in his prime. So I think Ocon there is going to be being compared to someone who is absolutely brilliant and who has taken teammates apart in the past as well. If you remember back to when he was at McLaren up against Van Dorn and he absolutely dominated him, whitewashed him in qualifying and ended Van Dorn's career in Formula One, really. So yeah, I think Ocon will be a little bit disappointed about that. I think I'd put him in this disappointed category. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, but at the same time, to me, he's not one of the most talented drivers on the grid, and he's got to be able to stand up for himself. And yes, he's going to be disappointed that Alonso's come in and that his car isn't great, but realistically, I think he should be disappointed at himself that he's not got that talent to make him stand out.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
But yeah, I'd say he's got to be disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, we saw when Ocon was before his year out, when he was at Racing Point, that he did have talent. He had, it was undoubtedly, he was there wheel to wheel with Perez, but Perez had been in that team quite a bit longer than he had. So you could excuse last year for being a little bit rusty, but I think this year there's no excuse. He has to be right back at it, and if anything, Alonso should be the one that's going to be a little bit rusty, but it certainly didn't look like that in the first race, so I think he's going to be a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, I don't mean that he's not talented, because I know all of these drivers are talented. I mean, they've made it to F1. But what I'm saying is he's not a Verstappen, he's not a Hamilton. You know, he's one of the people that sort of floats around in the middle, kind of unnoticed. And he could quite easily slip away if Alonso overshadows him. Yeah,
I agree. And it's quite that it's been a very rocky career for him, really, because he looked destined to inherit the Mercedes seat from Hamilton or from Bottas, whichever one left the team first, while he was at Racing Point, and then obviously he was forced out to make way for Stroll coming in, and then he's back in at Renault last year, but didn't look to have that same sort of quality about him than he did in his first stint. So I'm hoping that'll come back. I'm hoping we'll be able to see him bring the fight to Alonso, but on the basis of one race, it doesn't look like it so far.
Yeah. What about Ferrari? Or about Leclerc?
Well, you've skipped Alonso there.
What about Alonso?
I think that Alonso's going to be happy. Yeah, I think Alonso will be happy. He's back into the sport, and that's the main thing for him. Okay, he'd have rather been at a team that's going to be right at the front. I don't know, maybe he's signed a 2-year deal. Maybe he's seen what Alpine are going to be doing when there's the big regulation change for 2022, and he thinks that they're going to be right back at the front. Or maybe he just wasn't happy going out being in a really uncompetitive car with McLaren. He wanted to come back in and maybe get another podium or get a win somehow in a midfield Alpine car. But I think overall he'll be happy, probably just happy to be back in the sport, happy to be back racing, doing what he loves. So I think for me, happy.
Yeah, I think he's got to be happy. I mean, if you think about at the end of last season, how many people were wanting seats, I think that he can't be anything but happy. I mean, I'm not doubting his class, and that I don't think for a second he doesn't deserve to be there. but I think he's got to be happy. Even if he's not in the most competitive car, it's still from what I could see, a pretty good midfield car. You know, it's not as competitive, I don't think, as the Renault was last year. I don't think it's going to be getting podiums, but I think he's got the opportunity to outperform his teammate and the car, and I don't doubt that he's going to be getting points most weeks.
Yeah, Alonso had been outperforming the car for about 10 years before he left. Ever since he moved to Ferrari and then at McLaren, he'd been outperforming the cars pretty much week in, week out. So I have no doubt he'll be able to outperform this car. And if anyone's going to be able to get a podium in this Alpine, then it will be him. I'm pretty sure of that.
Should we try Ferrari?
Yeah, I think let's actually move on to Ferrari this time. Yeah.
What do you think about Leclerc?
I think he's going to be pretty happy. Happy with the step forward Ferrari have made this year. Obviously, he would have been, if we were doing this last year, he'd probably been devastated with the step back Ferrari had taken. He'll be happy there's progress again. Happy that Vettel's left. Really happy that he's now at this team that are going to be just completely building around him. Really, he signed a long-term deal there. I think in Drive to Survive, they said it was the longest deal in the history of Ferrari.
Yeah, it's 5 years, isn't it?
Yeah. So clearly he's their long-term prospect. So happy with the car. Happy that he's got a teammate now that, although he's going to be quick and right on his heels, I imagine he is now clearly the number one driver, as it were. Even though they won't call him the number one driver, he's the one they've got signed for a long time. So that's pretty much what it's going to be. So I think he can be happy.
Yeah, I think he'll be happy as well. I think at the end of the day, he like you say, he's the number one driver there now. He is essentially the Verstappen of, you know, Ferrari, the one that the team is being built around, right? And I don't think there was necessarily tension between him and Vettel. I know Drive to Survive kind of wanted to show otherwise, but I don't think there was that tension. But I do think it's going to be good for him to have Sainz there, because I think it will push him. Because I think he's a great driver. I mean, I don't think there's any question that he's a great driver. But I think it will be really good for him to have that person sort of pushing him a bit more than Vettel was able to last year.
Yeah.
And like you say, he's got long-term prospects there. He can't be anything but happy about 5-year security in what is essentially a very unsecure sport, right?
Yeah.
And like you say, Ferrari have made some like massive steps forward this year in comparison to their last year's car, and yeah, I think he can't be anything but happy.
Yeah, I agree. Sainz, on the other hand, I don't know. I think maybe neutral on this. He would have been when he actually signed for Ferrari before the 2020 season had started. He must have been happy because he chose to leave McLaren to go to Ferrari. Well, then with how the 2020 season went, McLaren finishing third and Ferrari finishing down in sixth, he'd have probably been pretty disappointed at that point. Probably still that little bit of disappointment maybe. Ferrari still behind McLaren for this year at least. But I think overall neutral. He just wanted to get in the red car. I'm sure of that. If pretty much any of the drivers on the grid were given the opportunity to drive the Ferrari, maybe the exceptions being Verstappen and Hamilton, and maybe Bottas as well, in those seats. But I think anyone else, just to be able to say that you've been able to drive a Ferrari in Formula One, that's what everyone wants to do. It's what everyone dreams of. Everyone wants to drive the red car when they're young.
Yeah.
So I think on balance, there's big elements of happy, big elements of disappointment. So on balance, probably neutral. Just a bit of a roller coaster of emotion, I'm sure.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'd wonder whether he's leaning a little bit more towards disappointed, to be honest, because if you think about how far the McLaren seems to have come, like I said, like not really sure it showed in the race. You know, you don't necessarily show your full potential in testing and in practice, but I think it was looking stronger than the Ferrari. So I wonder whether there is a part of him going, "Oh, what if? What if I hadn't moved?" But like you say, I think, you know, he can't. Everyone wants to drive that Ferrari.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it's a difficult one for me. I think potentially he's leaning a bit towards disappointed, but if you want to go neutral, I'm happy to go neutral.
Yeah, I think on balance, neutral is probably fair. So if we move on to AlphaTauri and Gasly, what do you think?
Yeah, I think he's got to be really happy. I don't think there was any doubt that he was going to still be there. I think in his heart of hearts, or whatever the phrase is, I think there was he imagined himself going to Red Bull, but I think pretty much all of us thought he was going to still be at AlphaTauri. So I wouldn't say he's elated for that reason, but yeah, he's probably pretty happy. I mean, that car was looking amazing. It was almost difficult to believe that it wasn't the Red Bull, if that's a little bit extreme, but you know what I mean. Like it was just doing far more than what you'd expect from an AlphaTauri. And yes, okay, he had an absolute shocker of a weekend, well, an absolute shocker of a race. But yeah, I think he's got to be really happy.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely happy for Gasly. He seems really comfortable in the team. Obviously, they've taken him to a podium and a race win. So I don't think he can be anything less than happy. Probably not any more than happy either. He'd probably rather be in a car that's right at the front. But seeing the progress that AlphaTauri have made this year, I'm sure he'll be happy with that as well. We're used to them being a sort of fringe points team, and Gasly occasionally extracting the best to get up towards sort of a 5th or 4th place finish. Obviously, he took that win. But on the usual weekend, fringe points. But this year it's looking like they're going to be, I don't know, maybe even the second fastest team from the midfield behind McLaren. It's certainly been a big step in the right direction for them. So yeah, I think I'll be very happy.
Yeah.
I think if we move on to Sonoda, I think I'd put him in the elated category.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Out of the 3 guys who have moved up from F2, he's going to be the one in the most competitive car by a long way. He's already shown in Bahrain that he's got that talent, some big overtaking moves. So I think he's clearly got the car underneath him to give him the confidence to do that. And yeah, I think it should be that anyone moving up from F2 to F1 is going to be elated, but Sonoda going into a car that's going to be looking like it should be in the points every weekend, it's going to be, certainly elating for him, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you say, anybody going up's got to be elated. And I was pleasantly surprised by him. I can't explain what it was, but there was a tiny bit of me that didn't have a lot of faith in him, and I don't really know why. But having watched him in F2, I was just not quite sure he was ready. But then as soon as he got in that AlphaTauri, I was like, oh, okay, I was completely wrong. Like, and yeah, I think just from the first weekend, what he was able to do with that car, I think was first person to score points since 2016 on his first, was it?
I can't remember the stat.
Okay.
It sounds about right.
I think it was the first person to score points on their very first race in F1 since 2016.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that would have been Van Dorn also in Bahrain. Yeah, when he stood in for Alonso.
I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
We're going to go with that.
Yeah.
Let's pretend that's the... Anyway, my point is, that's incredible. And I think, let's be honest, I mean, for him, it's a potential first step towards being in a Red Bull. And if you can't be in... At the minute, if you can't be in the Mercedes, you want to be in the Red Bull, right?
Yeah.
So, and I realise everything's going to change next year, or could change next year. But for him, like, not only has he taken that step towards being in the second best car on the grid, but he's also doing an incredible job. And it's had that massive step up. So, yeah.
Elation, definitely.
100%.
Elation, definitely, for Sonoda. The man he replaced, Kvyat, I think probably disappointed. It would be easy to say, any driver that's left F1 is going to be devastated. But for Kvyat, I think it's sort of been on the cards. He's felt a bit like a placeholder in that AlphaTauri seat ever since he came back into it, really. Just waiting for the next junior to graduate. So I think he'd have felt like it's coming. At the end of last year, he hadn't really done enough to show. I don't think that he was worthy of staying in that seat either. Yes, he had like some good races towards the end, Imola of course, being the standout. But yeah, but if you're gonna be kicked out of the sport, I think gonna be disappointed. Obviously, he's still there with Alpine as a reserve driver, so he's still going to be around the grid. But obviously, all the drivers they want to be going out and racing on a Sunday. So I think disappointed.
Yeah, I think he's got to be a little bit disappointed. I think he was very at peace with the whole thing when he left. That was the impression that I got. I felt like you say, I think he kind of knew it was coming, and I think he almost felt like it was time. He definitely was being outshone by Gasly week in, week out, and that's not got to be fun. So I don't know if there's an element of relief there, but I don't know. I think he's got to be a little bit disappointed, but maybe less disappointed than maybe some of the other drivers that might have been kicked out of the sport, as you put it.
Yeah. So I think probably the way he was more at peace was because this was basically his second chance already, because he'd been booted out. He went in with Toro Rosso, went into Red Bull, then got moved back to Toro Rosso, then kicked out of the sport, and then he got this sort of second life back at Toro Rosso, and then when it turned into AlphaTauri. But yeah, I think that's probably going to be the end of his career in F1 now. It would be very impressive if he comes back for a third time. Yeah. Moving on to the other Alfa, the Alfa Romeo.
Yeah. Raikkonen. As he seems to be with sort of everything, I think he's got to be fairly neutral.
Yeah, I agree. I think Raikkonen seems like he's neutral on pretty much everything. So I think on the terms of the transfer market, pretty neutral. He knew what he was getting into when he moved to Alfa Romeo. It was going to be a car that's, if not at in this sort of C class, then towards the back of the midfield. So he's probably happy enough with the progress that they've made this year, closing up the gap towards the midfield, it looks like. But yeah, overall pretty neutral, I reckon.
Yeah, I think for him, he's still doing what he loves, and I think that's more important than whether or not he's winning races almost.
Yeah.
Is it 20 years he's been doing
20
this?
years.
That's absolutely crazy. I think he just almost feels a little bit like he's quite happy to plod along doing what he's doing. And like you say, he's got to be happy with the progress that they've made, but he knows where he's at basically, and I think he's
as he says, it's more of just a hobby to him. So should we move on to Giovinazzi?
I think he's got to be pretty happy, to be honest, because I think he was a little bit like Ocon for me last year. He kind of floated into the background. No one really was talking about him too much. And the progress that they've made on the car, and I think he actually shone quite a lot last weekend. Mm-hmm. I think it's his real chance for him to do something. I think it's the best chance he's had. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he'll be happy as well, because sort of halfway through last season, it looked like he was going to be at serious risk of dropping out of the sport. It looked like that Schumacher or Eilert were fighting for that seat at Alfa Romeo. As it transpired, that they were fighting for a seat at Haas instead, and Giovinazzi was then kept in Alfa Romeo. I think he'll be very pleased about that. I think that Giovinazzi and Raikkonen seem to make a really good pairing. Actually, they seem to get on really well. It's probably the most underrated sort of team bromance on the grid. I think they were being overshadowed by Norris and Sainz a bit. They seem to get on really well and bounce off each other, and it seems like a very healthy team environment. So I'm not that surprised they kept them both on. It'll be very interesting to see if they kept on next year though, with Raikkonen being so old and Giovinazzi, if he wouldn't really needs to perform this year and probably beat Raikkonen, I reckon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he'll be still happy to be in the sport.
Yeah. Okay, what about Haas? Schumacher. I think he's got to be happy.
Yeah, I think the thing is, anyone coming into the sport, they have to be happy if they're graduating from F2 to F1. So I think he'll still be happy. Obviously, there's got to be a side of him that's maybe a bit disappointed that he's coming into a team that is so far down the grid. They look like they're going to be right at the back throughout the season, pretty much. And so it's got to be pretty difficult learning in a car that looks pretty terrible to drive as well. But yeah, I think the thing is he's got into the sport. He's got to be happy. So maybe a bit of me that leans towards putting him in neutral. But I think on balance he has to be just pleased to be in there really replicating what his dad's done.
Yeah, I don't think there's any of him that's disappointed. I think, yes, it's a difficult car to drive. But I kind of disagree with you. I think that it's got to be a really good learning experience for your first year in F1 to be given a very difficult car to drive. And he is clearly miles better than his teammate. And like you say, he's doing what his dad did. He's living the dream, in the sense that he is in F1. And I think that's got to be kind of all that's in his brain, I guess. I think as well, he's got to be fully aware that it's a stepping stone for him, and that if he was still in this position in a few years' time, that would be different. But I think in the same way that people don't come into AlphaTauri or Williams necessarily thinking that's where they're going to stay forever. There's no way he knows he's not going to be at Haas, and he knows that this is his time to get used to being in F1.
Yeah.
So I don't think he can be anything but happy, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's very true. You make a good point, especially with Schumacher in particular. If you followed him through his F3 and F2 seasons, he has this bit of first season syndrome, I guess you could call it, where he comes in and it takes him pretty much a year to get to grips with the car and how it all works. And then in the second season, he goes on and storms and takes the title. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be taking the title next year if he's staying in that Haas. But yeah, just being able to learn his craft, really, I think this year he'll be happy to be able to be in the sport and doing that.
Yeah, I think the thing for him is that he's got his dad to look up to, and I'm not saying that he should be compared to his dad, because I know he's a different person, but it's naturally going to happen, and he's going to have it in the back of his head. Well, my dad was like the greatest driver of all time, but he also knows that his dad didn't come in and win first year. Yeah. And there was this progress for him, right? I haven't just made a massive mistake.
No, he did. He came in and he was fast straight out of the boat. I think that's the saying.
Sure.
But his very first race, he was in a Jordan. He managed to qualify it pretty well, but then it broke down after like a few hundred meters, I think. So yeah, you have to tough it out in some difficult cars to start off with.
Yeah, but I just mean that he's got to be looking at that and going, no, it's okay, because look what he got.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if I'm here right now, because I can still get somewhere.
And even later on in his career, Michael Schumacher was in difficult cars to drive and cars that weren't able to compete for the championship. So every driver will go through a part in their career where they're in a difficult car. For Mick, he's in a difficult car in his first season. But I'm sure, as you say, it's going to be a stepping stone for him. For Mazepin, I think he's going to be happy as well. Maybe even a little bit more happy than Mick in terms of the transfer sagas. Because Mick, with his name and with the fact that he won the title in F2, it was pretty much written in the stars, I guess, that he was then going to be moving on to Formula One. For Mazepin, I think it was less on the cards, really. Maybe surprised us a bit. It seemed to happen quite fast. There wasn't really any talk of him moving on. Then suddenly there were the rumours, and then he was signed. So I'm sure he'll be happy about that. Being fifth, I believe it was, in F2 last year, with some other with Ilott especially being the key one, who you might have expected being second in the championship to then take that seat. But obviously he's got the money behind him to come in, and I'm sure this will have been his dream for a while to get into F1. And yes, he's in a car that's horrible to drive, but I can't imagine he's anything but happy to be there.
See, I disagree. I think that while he's got to be really, really happy that he's made it to F1 and he's kind of done it over people like Ilott, like you say, I think some of the things that happened in his personal life, he might be wondering, if I hadn't have been in the limelight, maybe I wouldn't Because, I mean, let's be honest, he's the most hated guy on the grid right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm wondering whether if he's thinking, if only I'd have had another year. Because let's be honest, he came in from 5th. So yes, it shows he's a great driver. But he maybe could have got even better. He might have had that extra experience, maybe had that life experience behind him as well. And then he might have had a bit more support from the general public and the fans, which I just only got to boost them as drivers, right? Yeah. I mean, for what happened for him, like, he's got to have gone out last weekend kind of feeling a bit self-conscious. And I mean, that's how I would feel. And
I'm sure you would, and so would like normal people, like us too. But drivers are something else, and once they're in the car, I'm sure they're focused on nothing else except the track and going as fast as they can.
Yeah, but they're also human.
Yeah.
There's got to be an element of it. It's got to cross his mind at some point. Whether or not he dwells on it, that's a different thing. But it's got to be there somewhere in his head. And it's like, if you think about Olympians, right? When they've got the crowds cheering them on, that has the positive effect. And it's got to affect them in some way.
Yeah, I'm sure it does to an extent. But
you fully disagree with me, don't you?
Pretty much. I think once they're on track, they're not thinking about that at all. Maybe off track, they will be playing on their mind a bit. But these guys, when they're on track, it's full concentration.
So I don't doubt that, but it's a very psychological sport.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's move on because I don't want to have a fight.
So I think I'll group the next two together. Really, Magnuson and Grosjean both leaving Haas. For me, I think it's now, after this first race, it's got to be more of a neutral feeling for them. I'm sure initially it was disappointment, maybe even devastation to not be on the grid for 2021, but seeing just how bad that Haas is and how difficult it is to drive, I'm sure neither of them especially want to be behind the wheel of it. Yes, of course, they want to still be in Formula One, but they probably don't want to be right at the back, trundling around, trying to stop the car spinning.
Yeah.
So, and they're going off to do different things. Grosjean going into IndyCar, Magnussen doing some racing in America as well, I believe. So I think the feeling for them now is probably neutral.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't think it was particularly a secret that they were fairly devastated at the time.
Yeah.
Again, Drive to Survive. I don't know how true it was, but I definitely got the impression that they thought one of them would be going. So I think they must have been devastated when both of them went.
Yeah.
I think for Grosjean a little bit, maybe was quite disappointed that he never got his last full race. But yeah, like you say, the car is so bad that there's got to be an element of relief.
Yeah. Okay, shall we move on now to Williams?
Yeah.
The last team. And George Russell. Do you want to start with this one? George Russell fangirl?
I kind of want to say neutral, but I kind of want to go disappointed as well. I think, it's his 3rd year. He has shown how good he is. That it's got to be a little bit like, oh, come on, Hamilton, just leave already. But at the same time, I think he's actually very loyal to his team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've said this so many times, he outperforms his car every single week. He's getting into Q2 when he probably shouldn't be. He is showing the world just how talented he is. So from that point of view, I don't think he can be that disappointed. And the car seems to... Alternatively, the Haas might just be that bad. But I think the car seems to have improved this year. I think it seems a little bit more competitive. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go as far as to say it's competitive, but it's getting a little bit more that way. So yeah, I'd kind of probably neutral on balance. But yeah, I think there's got to be an element of him that's kind of itching to be in the faster car that he knows he should be in, especially when he's seeing other people of his generation. Like him, he's the last one, really, isn't he? That's still in the rubbishy car.
Yeah.
But he's racing at the end of the day, and he's really racing. So he's, I don't know. Yeah, I'll go with neutral, but
yeah, I think on balance I'd go with neutral as well. He feels a bit like what we said for Sainz as well, where it's a bit of a roller coaster. Obviously, there's the disappointment of not being in that Mercedes. After he got the taste of it in Sakir, he knows exactly what he could do, that he could be right at the sharp end. fighting for wins, fighting for the championship, but instead he's in a Williams, fighting to have a chance of scoring points, not even fighting for points every weekend. So he'll be disappointed about that still being a car at the back. But he does seem to love the team. Like you say, he seems to get on really well with the guys and girls who work there, and seem to be really settled. And yeah, obviously just pleased to still be in the sport, to which all the drivers, I'm sure, are grateful to be there. Yeah. So yeah, happy in that respect, but disappointed. So I think neutral on balance, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think there was really a question of him leaving, though.
Yeah, no, I don't think there was a question of leaving. There was slight rumour that maybe he could be out and Perez could be in there. But that was quickly whispered away, I think.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second. But yeah, I think the thing with him is, yeah, he's maybe a little bit disappointed that he's still in a Williams, but like we kind of said, it's almost guaranteed that one day he's going to be in that Mercedes. So it's just a waiting game for him, isn't it?
Yeah. He just needs to be patient, I think. That's probably why he's happy.
Yeah.
To still be there, because he knows next year or the year after, he's going to be going into that Mercedes.
Yeah. And he seems like a fairly mellow guy to me. Maybe I've read him completely wrong, but he just seems grateful for what he has, and I don't think he's in a rush.
Yeah. So should we move on to Latifi, our last driver as well?
Yeah. I think he's happy. I don't think his seat was necessarily guaranteed. I think of the two of them, he was probably the one that had the bigger question mark. I don't think there was necessarily rumours about it. That was just my gut feeling.
Yeah, I think he wasn't in. It was a weird one because he wasn't in danger of leaving.
Yeah.
But if you were to pick maybe the bottom 3 or 4 drivers last year that you were to say, no, I think they shouldn't be in the sport and someone else should be instead, he'd probably been one of them.
Yeah.
If you'd asked most people that question.
But yeah, I think he's happy to be in the car. I think he's fairly chilled. I think he kind of has accepted that Russell's going to beat him every week, or at least qualify ahead of him every week. I think he pushes the car as much as he can, and I think he's just happy to be driving on a Sunday.
Yeah, I think he's done enough to show he deserves a seat in a team like Williams that are going to be near the back of the grid. He's fast enough. Obviously, he came second in his last season in F2 before he graduated to F1. But yeah, like you say, there wasn't real doubt about him leaving.
Yeah.
But I think he'll still be happy to be there, basically in the top tier of motorsport, racing pretty quick. Yes, okay, getting beaten by George in qualifying, if not every week, then most weeks. But I think he'll still be happy to be there. He just seems like a happy guy in general, really.
He's quite sweet, isn't he? You say not every week, but he's yet to be. He's yet to beat George.
Yeah. I'm hopeful that there'll be at least one weekend this year where he'll be able to put a good qualifying to get together and beat him. But
yeah, I think
Russell just looks so good on a Saturday.
I think it's inevitable. One week he'll slip up and Latifi will win, but I don't think he's that bothered. I think the pair of them get on quite well.
Yeah.
I think they're just quite happy as they are, and I think Williams is quite a healthy environment for both of them.
Yeah, so. I think Williams is certainly a healthy environment now than it was a couple of years ago when the car was properly terrible.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that's it then. That's our tier list all put together. We'll leave a link for the tier list so that you can go and do your own. And please let us know what you think. What bits you think we've got right or wrong? Which drivers do you think are most elated? Which ones do you think are most disappointed? Maybe you think Hamilton's devastated to be in a car that's clearly not the clear fastest this year. So yeah, please feel free to let us know about that. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And yeah, find us on Instagram and Twitter at the F1 Couple as always. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. And until next time, we'll see you around.
Bye.